Hello, friends, and welcome to the first episode of the CUInsight Network. My name is Randy Smith. I am one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, also the host of the CUInsight Experience podcast, and it is my job on the CUInsight Network to have conversations with thought leaders who support the credit union community. We get to look at some issues that are affecting credit unions, hopefully find out some best practices and pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that can make our credit unions better. My guest on today's show is Bill Gould. Bill is a senior vice president over at Securian Financial Group. He manages Securian's Financial Group's insurance, as well as the Financial Institutions Group. What does that mean? I do need to look down at my notes for this because it means a lot. He oversees sales, business development, financial management, strategic planning, marketing, compliance, and operations. And if that's not enough, he's also responsible for the financial institution insurance business in Canada. Bill, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the chance to be here today.
Oh, yeah, I was looking forward to having you on because there's so much that Securian does. But I'd like to start with a little background. Let people get to know you. Most of us, didn't grow up thinking someday we'd work with credit unions. What did Bill want to be when he grew up? And, what was that career path to get to where you are today?
Yeah, well, it's such a great question. And Randy, I'll tie it back to something you said. I think once you described yourself as an explorer, right? I would describe myself as a skill collector. So I really think that throughout my life, I've really tried to make sure that I collect skills, and that's really served me well. But that a little bit of the question that you might have been asking is, where did I think I would go? No one thought we'd end up in this business. It just kind of happens that way. And quite to the contrary, I'm the complete black sheep in my family. They're all jewelers. My dad, my brother, both uncles, a grandfather, a great-great-grandfather. We have the little picture of my great-great-grandfather on the wooden sidewalk in the front of the jewelry store over 100 years ago.
No kidding.
In a small town in Minnesota, yeah.
Wow. So how'd the black sheep get to where you are today?
That's such a good question. So the thing I fell in love with working with my dad's small business was, accounting is really the language of business.
Yeah.
So I went to the University of Minnesota. I studied accounting there. I also studied, I didn't want to be that typical one, talk about the skill collector. I wanted to make sure I got a speech minor so that way I could be better at communicating than what some of my peers would be. And then senior in college, I got an offer for an internship at this company called Minnesota Mutual in St. Paul, Minnesota. Didn't know really where it was, didn't know much about it, but the internship was a great opportunity. Versus some of my friends that were getting them at public firms, I got to work on premium taxes and a whole bunch of different responsibilities because someone was going to be on leave. So I took that job 25 years ago, Randy. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
And then my time at Securian, I stayed on through my internship. They kept me part-time through the rest of my senior year. They were converting from these management-based financials to US GAAP. And then a month before I graduated, they called and offered me a full-time job.
Isn't that funny? I'll tell you, my internship led to a full-time job right out of college too. And it sounds like from how long you've been there, we're about the same age. So I actually remember I worked for Morgan Stanley right out of college, and the branch manager called because I hadn't heard from him about a full-time position a month beforehand. And so I started interviewing with other places. And he heard through the grapevine I was interviewing. It was like, "What? You don't like us?" And I was like, "No, you never offered me a job."
I had the same experience where it was like starting to look, and that's what a month before they're like, "No, we want you to stay permanent."
Yeah, so, you're like, fantastic.
Yeah. So I started in the financial reporting team. Just a quick one. I started in the financial reporting team. Spent 5 years there. I did our GL subsidiaries. Worked my way up to be our US GAAP accountant. Then I jumped. At 5 years in, I went to mergers and acquisitions. And that was when our last CEO decided what he wanted and didn't want in the portfolio. And this was my first experience. I supported our financial institution business when I was an accountant. But then in the mergers and acquisition side, we've done a lot of acquisitions in that financial institution space. And so I was part of the team that bought Allied, CNL, which was a part of One America, Balboa. So a lot of the blocks of business I got to work on in that role when our last CEO was deciding what he wanted in the portfolio.
Oh, that actually sounds like a lot of fun.
It was great. was a time when I was, I've got 4 kids. It was a time when I was doing that. Got my master's at that time. Then I jumped. Then I was the CFO for one of the other divisions at Securian.
Okay.
So then I supported our retail products. So individual life insurance, our financial advisors, and our career broker dealer. Yep. Eventually I took over all the actuaries, did product development. And then it was just 5 years ago, I guess 6 years ago now, I made the move into our financial institution business. So it came back to where I kind of started.
Kind of full circle.
Exactly.
This question I'm about to ask you, it seems like it's difficult because Securian does so much. But let's pretend the pandemic doesn't exist. You and I meet at a conference. Give me the elevator pitch. What does Securian do, and how do you support credit unions?
Yeah, well, it's such a good one. And since I've been there for a long time, you know how it is. You sometimes take it for granted. Yeah. The first thing I'll say is, Securian's been around for 140 years. We're incredibly highly rated. We're actually a Fortune 500 company. Last year, we had about $1.3 trillion of insurance in force and served 21 million customers across North America. So we're really proud of that. And the thing that I love that's so similar to the credit union marketplace is we're a mutual holding company. So we're owned by our policyholders and our members. And so that real strong tie-in, we don't have to worry about quarterly profits going to the street. We're not publicly owned like that. And we're really committed to the financial institution marketplace. So we've been in that for over 60 years. Wow. And our CEO, Chris, he actually grew up in that space. He actually came to us from Allied Solutions. And so he has a lot of excitement. It's one of the reasons we've been so prolific in our acquisitions, including the expansion into Canada, which you mentioned that we did.
Yeah, we know we're friends with the folks over at Allied Solutions. Pete was on the podcast a year or so ago. He's a good guy. So, yeah. As we were preparing for this conversation, we talked about a couple situations that are important to credit unions. I'd like to start with that attracting and retaining members. By having a variety of lending options, and it's tough to talk about lending in credit unions, and I think maybe even in this current environment even more without talking about defaults and delinquencies. So in the current environment, what trends are you seeing in that area?
Yeah, well, let's start with your first question, because I do think one of the things the credit union the credit union's really been focused on is how is it that we can grow membership. And we took the time last year to actually do a little bit of consumer research. So we ran a project that was really trying to understand what current members were looking for, what their advocacy was. We also tried to understand what some of the differences between the generational insights might be. And then finally, we wanted to really understand more about what their lending and protection needs were and some of the preferences. And some of the insights we gained were really interesting, especially in this time, as you mentioned. People are really focused on how do I find the monthly expenses? How do I make sure that I have enough saved? How do I protect myself? And some of the standard things they had in the past aren't working so well. And that lends itself to what you talked about in the delinquencies. We have record unemployment. And it's not just that. Over 40% of the people last year said they either lost their job or took a decrease in pay. And so you think about how important some of those lending opportunities that we have in the credit union space, and then the protection we provide. And it really came out in this research that we did. And it's a place that credit unions are so well placed to be able to help their members out.
So when did you do this? When did you say you did the research? Was this pre-pandemic, or was this something you've been doing over the summer? Okay, so just kind of quick.
We did it. We looked at last year and we're like, there's never going to be a better understanding because consumer preferences were going to change. Yeah. I liken it to Randy, when we used to go to an airport before 9/11, right, we had one set of expectations. And then after that, it was like everything changed and we adapted.
Absolutely.
And I suspect the consumer will do much the same. How much more will you shop online now?
I was just reading an article about one of the biggest changes, not only for all of us, but for seniors right now in using, online grocery services and things they would have never thought of pre-pandemic. It's just changed the entire mindset, like what you're saying about what we think is normal. And I've noticed talking to credit union CEOs, online bill pay, things like that were remote deposit capture, they've been around for years, but the adoption went from 20% to 80% over the course of a month, where they just couldn't get that before. So I agree. I think we're going to see a lot of different things going forward, right? Or that becomes our normal. Just like, I
Well,
love
and
your airport analogy.
Yeah, you won't have to worry about the fact that how do I drive adoption? It's like you said, it takes care of itself. Now ours is to make sure that we can keep understanding where things are going. And the one thing that was important, and you kind of pulled this out there, for credit union members, what we found is it's really important that they continue to connect with members because that is a great source for new members. And in this environment in particular, because everything is changing and people are asking their friends and family, all right, where should I go or what do I do now?
Let me ask you, something else that I found really interesting, and I wonder if how they tie together is this idea that, it's also protecting the member from all these unexpected things that we're talking about right now. I hadn't heard that number that so many people had either, I knew what the unemployment number was, but it's also reduced hours. And when you start to look at households, if one person lost their job, that really does a number on a household, So, how does Securian help here? And do they both tie in together when we're talking delinquencies, but we're also talking about protecting members from those unexpected emergencies, let's just say? To me, in my mind, they tie well together.
So. And here's the part where, we get to live that kind of providing value to the members in a real sense, because anything we do to help out our members inadvertently helps us as well. So if you've added involuntary unemployment insurance to a loan, if you've added disability or life insurance to a loan, chances are nowadays those consumers weren't going to have those kind of protections. And we saw that at Securian. We paid out $270 million in benefits to our financial institution clients last year. And that helps the people out, the members out, but it also helps the financial institutions because that reduces the number of delinquencies. And some of the stories we got, I just got one out of our claims area last week about someone who said, look, if I hadn't added disability to this, I don't know what I'd be doing for a car right now. And those kind of things, they pull at the heartstrings. It's where we can really make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, those stories are just amazing. When you're looking forward, where do you, we've seen a ton of disruption in financial institutions across the board over the past few years, fintech players coming in and I guess you could say non-banking entities, Apple and Facebook are now huge banks, right? So, what trends are you seeing, going forward? You mentioned that personal connection, earlier when you were talking. What trends are you seeing, I guess, overall in financial services, since you work with more than credit unions, but also, what do credit unions need to do to stay relevant going forward in your mind?
Yeah, well, this is where I think credit unions are so well positioned from some of the bigger players. So what the people in rural South Carolina need is not the same as what they want in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Which is different than what they want in the heartland in Iowa. And so we really work with our credit unions to make sure we set up programs and help them achieve what fits their clientele most. And it is one of the things I also love about the credit union marketplace is that we're not afraid to try things and they share information, right? You love going to conferences. You talk about this all the time. I love going to conferences, and I love to see the fact that credit unions are so open to sharing. And so that way they get to test things and learn. We don't find that in the other markets. And it's one of the unique things that I really think sets credit unions apart from other financial institutions.
It's funny you say that because, speaking with friends of mine who I started my career with before I got into credit unions, they're always blown away by how willing people are to share. Right. And collaborate with each other. And it's not looked at as just a huge competition. And it's one of those beautiful things about credit unions. You're right. I couldn't agree more.
Randy, one more thing on that crystal ball too. I think we're going to continue to look at that customer experience piece. We talked about that. That's going to drive things. The other one, and this has really served credit unions well too, is we're going to see a lot of regulatory change. That's been going on. I don't think anyone suspects it's going to slow down now. And so credit unions are just traditionally well placed for that. We take the value to the members and put that out in front of profits and other things. And that's always served us well. And I suspect it will in the future too.
So it brings up an interesting question because I think it's so timely. We obviously have a new administration now. So the new head of the NCUA was just announced yesterday, I think. I think like you said, we all expect regulatory changes going forward. How does Securian help there? I know you oversee compliance also when I read the intro.
Yeah.
So, how do like, I guess any thoughts or hacks or I recently I'd say October, November, as we were leading up to the election, a lot of credit union CEOs were wondering what that regulatory landscape would look like. Any thoughts on that? I know it wasn't in our prepared.
I do think it's gonna change. And you mentioned it before. We do serve a few other financial institution markets. We watched it move in a big way with the CFPB for banks.
Yeah.
And so that has some impact in the credit union marketplace. And some states are trying to pick that up and use that as well. Now, like I said before, I find credit unions are better positioned because of that value proposition to the member. And but one of the things at Securian we constantly try to do is play out, well, what have we learned from some of those past experiences? And also, how could that look going forward? Because I do think CFPB or consumer kind of financial protection is going to be at the core of a lot of changes, whether or not it's at the state level or the federal level.
That's interesting. That's good stuff there. I've got to throw this out there. What are you most excited about going forward that you're doing at Securian?
Well, yeah, I am excited about some of those investments we're making in the future. I do think that a lot of change is coming. And so whether or not that's some of the things you mentioned before on the digital side or some of the other changes in products, in the crisis, we tweaked our IUI, our involuntary unemployment coverage, to help cover more people. I think this wasn't really well publicized, but 5 years ago, what was interesting was retail or individual insurance was surpassed by group products. So more people get insurance and protection from their credit unions, employers than they do from retail advisors now.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of silent, but the protection that our credit unions provide is so important to that middle market because retail advisors focus on asset gathering and retirement. And so a lot of people are left without important kind of things that credit unions provide in addition to those important lending products.
That is good stuff. I didn't realize. I honestly, you just gave me. You said wasn't publicized that well, but that was new information, making me smarter. I love it. To wrap up the show, I like to have a little fun with some rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be. Was there a recent purchase? This is a new question to this show, but a recent purchase that you didn't know you needed, but now you're like, I can't live without it.
Right, and this is such a great COVID one. And so we just 3 weeks ago got a new puppy. And
I was going to say it was either a puppy or a Peloton when you said a COVID one.
Yeah, so. That seems to be the biggest one. Yeah. So we got a new little Shih Tzu Maltese, and my family, I have 4 kids. They are all in love with him, and so that has been the one. I was like, we already had one dog. I can't imagine. I'm just lucky he hasn't run across the screen while we've had our interview.
That's I love it. It's always good to have puppies around the house, so they might keep you up a little bit. But when you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
Oh.
It's my favorite question, by the way.
That's a really good one, right? I mean, on a more personal note, I mentioned this before. I always think of my father. I learned so much from his business. He was an entrepreneur in a small town, ran a family-owned jewelry store. I learned a ton from him. Yeah. If I think on the bigger stage, right, someone I've always kind of been in awe of, Warren Buffett. The fact that he lives in Omaha, does all the things he does, still, goes out to a state but doesn't live in a way, and is so much about giving back.
Yeah, that's very cool, and it's always good to have the dad get a shout out. I'll tell you, a lot of times mom does. So, the random question, like I said, it sounds like we're about the same age. What's the greatest album of all time?
Oh, this is a tough one, right? I mean, it seems to move around. I think one that always sticks to me. I love U2. So I loved How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. I think one of my favorite albums. I still, jam out on that one every now and then.
It's funny. I always add U2 songs to any playlist I have in my the earpod or the AirPods as well. Is there a book that either you've gifted others or you think everybody should read?
Oh, okay. So this is a good one, right? Everyone always thinks that this is fake behind me. This one.
I love it.
I love this book here. So Angela Duckworth's Grit. And so I just think it's so good. I paid each of my kids $20. They're all capitalists, Randy, to read this book with me and then have a discussion about it. So this is one of my long all-time favorites. I will tell you another one though that I also really like. We're doing, with everything that happened this last year, we've been doing book circles at work, and so a really good book that was So You Want to Talk About Race by Injilin Olu, and it's a fabulous book. Another one, great conversations around our dinner table as we've read that book.
I know that book. The other one I have not read yet, so you're adding to my book list, which I always appreciate. So if the calendar's empty, you mentioned 4 kids, a couple puppy or a new puppy now. What does Bill do to recharge? How do you? What's that? I'll add to that. What does that work-life integration look like to you?
I'm sure everyone's been struggling with that. The room. I'm actually downstairs because those 4 kids are like, Dad, you're too loud, and we're online learning, so you need to give us a little space. And so at the end of the day, when I come out of here in particular, I love to run. I'm a runner, and there have been days when I get done with work, and even when supper's ready, I'm like, oh, I need to decompress. And so that's when I'm also an outdoors person. So I live up in Minnesota. Love to get outdoors. Pretty much in every season. Right now, even I love to take the dogs on those walks through the snow. So it is, it's a thing I love to do.
I think we have all been walking more this year. So that will be one of those interesting statistics to see once this thing is all over, the past 12 months, right? So, we will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes that go along with this video. My last question that I have for you, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share or asks of our audience?
Yeah, the one thing is we've kind of been talking today. The one thing I would focus on here is, I would ask that credit unions continue to look for ways to evolve. You've done it for decades, and nothing's different except the pace of change is faster. I'll give you an example of some of the things we're doing at Securian. We know that digital ecosystem is moving quicker than we can keep up. And so while we continue to do things internally, we look for partners, whether or not that's Allied Solutions or Franklin Madison. We even partnered with another insurance company here in the Twin Cities, Allianz, to work on an accelerator, which is really just a funding mechanism for InsurTech and FinTech. So I would urge all your credit union listeners to think about how can they find other partners, because some of that you want to do yourself, but you can't do it all anymore. And so how do you create and take advantage of all the people around you in the community and in that broader ecosystem to really kind of drive and evolve your business?
Gosh, you just reminded me of something. That's so good. I've been reading a book recently called "Thank You for Being Late" by, I think his name's Thomas Friedman. I'll have to check that out for the show notes. But he talks about just how the whole world has changed, where we can all collaborate across the entire world, right? So I think what you said there is amazing. Thank you again, Bill, for being on the show. I greatly appreciate you being my guinea pig and our first. So this was amazing. And I look forward to the day that we can all cross paths again soon. So stay well, my friend.